So yes, a very warm welcome to KDRTV Live. Welcome. It's 8:10 Central Time. It's 9:10 Eastern Central Time. Happy to have you on the show tonight. We'll be talking about the just finished or concluded general election here in the United States, and getting to really have an understanding of what the immigrant community think of the elections and how we move forward. So on the show, I'm very happy to welcome one more time again Professor Kefo Tiso, who's joining us live from Ohio. We also have Dr. Edwin Bogongo, respected medical doctor here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. We also have a respected leader of the Kenyan community here in the state of Minnesota, Hulda Momanyi Hitzle, and also respected attorney Henry Ongeri, apologies for that, who will also be talking to us about many other aspects. So let's get to the conversation right away, and I think it's befitting to start with the ladies in the house first. Hulda, so the elections are done. We have, at the very least for now, we have a president-elect, Joe Biden, and the running of vice president-elect, Kamala Harris. What is your immediate reaction to the elections?
So first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Okai, for having us here and having this opportunity to engage in a very historic elections. So my first impression is that, the Democrats didn't win, the Republicans didn't win, America won. And if we can acknowledge that America won, then we can, start paving the road to healing and bringing this country together. So really overall, this is what democracy looks like. Whether you like whoever who won or not, the people have spoken, and they have spoken very loudly. So that's my very first impression.
Good, very quick take. I appreciate the fact you're getting very precise and to the point. Great. Let's go to Mheshimiwa Honorable Henry Ongeri. Your quick reaction.
Thank you. Thank you, KDRTV, for this chance. It's a little soon, but my immediate reaction was really of relief. I was relieved that after all, the American experiment, which in my view was on the ballot, may survive. I think that the last 4 years showed us the fragility of this experiment. And so my first reaction was relief that we can still look to the rest of the world as a beacon of democracy and not otherwise. I was very, very impressed by the huge turnout. I thought that with this, now we have the moral authority to go around the world and continue preaching the values of democracy. That was my initial reaction.
But I'm glad you're talking about democracy. Others might have a different perspective, but let's begin with Dr. Edwin Bogongo, your immediate reaction.
So I think I'll go back to what President-elect Joe Biden said, which is, let's give each other a chance. I think if there's anything, I think the election almost forces us to have what I call cordial dialogue, love and respect for one another. And it reminds me that the leader of the free world needs to be somebody that espouses these values. And even as we agree to disagree, I think my initial reaction, yes, is relief, but overarching over that is the idea that we should never again allow those in power to demonize those that are in search of freedom and opportunity. That is what attracted many of us to come to this country. And to think that half of the American people still voted for the alternative, I think is one of those really interesting facts about this election. But I feel that freedom and opportunity and tolerance won against bigotry and hate, and I stand to be corrected.
Okay, so sounds good. I think it's that's the essence of democracy. You're entitled to your opinions, and I think as long as opinions are respected by other parties, that's good. So, Professor Tiso, let's talk about this. I think most people, not across the country, but all around the world, are really attuned to what's going on in the United States. That's okay. This probably in the next few days we'll go through whatever the legal process, but we get back to work. So let's begin with your immediate reaction from what this is, and going forward, really, what are the lessons that we learned from this that are more relevant to the immigrant community here in the U.S.?
No, I also echo my co-panelist comments that this is a historic election by any measure. Obviously, we have the first female vice president of the country ever. It's very difficult to believe that in 200 years and beyond, even 400, if you want to go to the beginning of the country, that for the first time in 2020, we're having a female a vice president, and it's only fitting that she's also a minority, because minorities have actually contributed to this country perhaps more than people sometimes acknowledge. Like Dr. Bogonko was saying, we also recognize that the vote is actually fairly split. You're looking at 51% for Biden and 48% for Mr. Trump. So you can see that it's a fairly divided country, and healing is going to be a challenge, but we wish Biden and Kamala Harris all the best as they move ahead to bring the country together. But the fact that the vote is that split should tell you that nobody should be under any illusion to the challenges that they're going to face as they govern going forward. For us as immigrants, obviously, I think for me the first lesson is be involved. That's lesson number one. We have to be involved. And then we can see that perhaps the lack of involvement, everyday governance of the country actually affects us. There's a professor at the University of Minnesota who passed away a few years back. His name is John Arthur. He once called us, especially African immigrants, invincible sojourners. In other words, we are not visible. We are not visible in the political process. We are not visible in the everyday governance of the country. And I think going forward, that's actually what that means. Let's not just show up during election day. Let's all show up every single day when the policies are being crafted by those who are in power.
Goes blank here. So let's get to you, Madam President. I know in a moment we'll be focusing strictly on the impact of Kamala Harris on the women population in the U.S. and elsewhere around the world. But your take as a leader of one of the largest organizations here in the Twin Cities, what's your take? What do we as immigrants learn from this just concluded elections?
So there's a lot of takes from this election, particularly the fact that democracy works exactly how it's set up, right? But what historic moment that all of us witnessed is the elections that resulted into a first woman. Not only was she the first woman, a woman of color, not only was she the first woman of color, she was a child of an immigrant from Southeast Asia, and I believe Jamaican. And so for us immigrants here in America, that should really give us a sense of hope, a sense of we also belong here, a sense of possibility, what is possible. In her speech, she talked about, how she thought about her mother and her family and the struggles that they had to endure to be here, to really motivate her, to propel her to be the first woman, not necessarily the first woman, I'm not exactly sure, but Attorney General of California. So being an immigrant is no longer this thing that we have to fear. It has become now this thing that we can actually embrace as immigrants and say that we are in America. And there's still that possibility. There's still that opportunity for us to dream, not only for ourselves, but for our generations and our kids' generations to come. So for me as a woman and especially a woman leader within our community, it was personal. It was personal in the sense that, I'm going to sit back one day and tell my daughter I was a part of that. I casted a vote for the first vice president woman, and I can say that I have roots as an immigrant here, that I am capable of doing this. And to pass that along to my daughter was definitely emotional for me, and to realize the magnitude of that moment.
Madam President, the Americans are just getting their first female vice president. We already have a president, but we'll get to that in a moment. Let's bring in Honorable Henry Ongeri. Henry, by the way, in the last 2 weeks, and particularly in the last 5 days, I've had a lot of phone calls and text messages from people, not across the US, but also from Africa, Kenya in particular. It looks like people are very, very interested in what's going on in the US, and they're not even interested in what's happening in their home countries. So what is your take, and what lessons do we as immigrants learn from this? And also, obviously, we have a few followers in the African continent. What do we learn from this?
I think I join in the sentiments of Professor and Madam President that this election will go down in history as one of the most consequential for not just for the United States, but for really the whole world, because at the time that we are living in, what happens in Vegas no longer stays in Vegas. It reverberates across streets in the world. And so I understand why people in Kenya, for example, stayed up late watching the elections, probably with keener interest than they watch their own elections back home. That is because, as I said earlier, a lot of things were at stake in this election. The example of people who have had the desire to immigrate into the United States and had gone through the process even of acquiring the visas to come, that was stopped in their tracks. Granted, there was COVID, but they were stopped by the proclamation of April this year. And so issues like family reunification directly affect people outside of the country. There are children that still are looking for their parents. 500 plus children are looking for their parents. There are students who were holding admission letters who cannot travel to the United States to study. There are H-1B spouses in the United States that can no longer renew their work authorization. I mean, the list is endless. So I understand why the whole world was glued to the TVs. And plus, frankly, we also not managed the COVID situation well. So the world was focusing on us so that they see what kind of decision is made. I fully understand that, but I think that there was a sense in the world that another 4 years of what we've had in the past 4 would have been a devastating thing, not just for the United States, but for the entire world. So I think that the feeling of relief that I expressed earlier is probably shared across the world for a reason. The other thing that I wanted to mention is now that the election is hopefully behind us soon, the next chapter of this issue will be the cautious optimism that we should all have, so that we don't expect that because now we have a new administration, then now everything is going to go as well as we want it to go. I agree with Prof. Kefa that we need to stay engaged. We need to hold the new administration's feet to the fire, because then otherwise our effort at changing the administration would be naught, because then we'll be back to where we were. Thank you.
So let's bring in Edwin here. Edwin, let's face it. Politics is very emotive. It's a very emotive science, and as we know, emotions is something that within a short time, emotions are high, somewhere in the middle or low. Whether you're the Democrats, obviously the emotions are very happy. People are in jubilation, and those who are supporting the Republican Party are not very happy. But we know within the next few days, the emotion will be gone, and that's the reality about life, and that's the reality about politics. But let's stay relevant to the immigrant population here. And for the many years, I know you as a professional person and a respected member of our community, and a passionate politician. You talk politics, by the way. I appreciate your politics. What is the takeaway for our community? People watching us right now, and they're saying, look, we have our leaders here. We have a respected lawyer here We have a Madam President, we have a professor here, we have a medical doctor here. People watching this and saying, we're looking up to the best in our communities. The emotions are gone, but in reality, what are the really, really big lessons we take from this?
Well, I think, as Wakili said, the United States being a beacon of hope for democracy, freedom, liberty, those are not light words to describe a country. And a country that is really predicated on the contributions of generations of immigrants for many hundreds of years. I think it's a lesson to tell us that by the virtue of us being here, this is the home of our great-grandchildren, whether we like it or not. We are settling here, we've grown as an immigrant community, and so we have to get involved. We have to be part of writing this history, whether it's making sure women are participating in the political process, culminating in the historic election of Kamala Harris, whether it's the idea that a lot of immigrants ran for office and a few barriers have been broken. But I think democracy is about participation. And what this tells us is that we cannot be just people sitting on the sidelines. It behoves us as a community to get organized, to be able to tell the rest of the world that we're here. We're not only organized, but we want a seat at the table, and get some of our own people get elected to office so that we can participate in the process of being heard, being counted, and taking part in a political discourse. I do think that, back to the idea that as immigrants, what does it mean? Well, I think today, this is a win for those who believe that the concept of democracy is something that America has promoted across the globe. And there was a sense that over the last 4 years, we sort of had the sense that other countries, for example, strongmen that are trying to rewrite the history of freedom and free politics, that it was okay because Americans were no longer engaged. So I think there's a sense of relief, yes, and I think it goes to say that at this moment in history, perhaps it was necessary for a lot of us to take a pause.
Okay, good. Ulda, I'll get to you in a moment, but I want to bring Kefa in for a moment for a reason. Kefa, off camera, we're talking about really the significance of these elections as related to our immigrant community. Once the emotions are gone, I mean, it's normal. If you look at the African continent, whether it's in Kenya, it's in Nigeria, in Ivory Coast, we have these issues about politics, people lining up to one political persuasion and the others, and then at the end of the day, the common man is one who suffers most and those ones in power. But let's get to the U.S. and really move the emotions away, whether it's Democrats or Republicans. I see a lot of people on the social media talking about how we are so happy about Joe Biden winning, but that doesn't really add anything to the table, particularly to the immigrant community. Why is it important that we move beyond this political affiliation so that we focus on what is really important for us as an immigrant community? Professor Tison, then I'll get to you in a moment, Hulda.
I think what I'll suggest, Dr. Okari, and I appreciate the question, is this. The communities that in this country begin by identifying their enduring interests, and then they go about setting up the structures and being organized and making sure that they win, regardless of actually who is in power. You look at the corporations, big corporations in America, whether you take Amazon, you take Microsoft, if you look at their voting behavior, and the way they spend their money in elections, they actually put money on Democrats, they put money on Republicans, and many other communities do that. The white population, for example, is actually evenly split. But the outcome of that is that actually, regardless of who is in power, these communities are always pretty much winning. So what that actually means then is that we also have to start thinking of how we hedge our bets. You can always vote whichever way you want privately, but as a community, when it comes to formulation of policy, which is actually where elections have consequences. So for example, if you look at immigration policy, even though the overall law under which immigration policy is conducted, which is mainly the 1965 immigration law, the administrations have a little bit of leeway and substantial leeway in terms of how they enforce different provisions of that law and actually how they go about complying with it. This is where I would encourage our people to make sure that they are engaged in the everyday policy formulation. And actually that's where a number of us already are talking about how do we come up with what actually matters to us as African immigrants, as immigrants in general, and how do we make sure that actually we engage with the administration, even one that we might think, for example, is friendly, to make sure that actually we achieve our objectives. Let me put something here that perhaps some may not necessarily understand, but for example, when Obama came into power, we were also very happy. And I mean, first black person to be a president and the like. But if you look at certain aspects of how his immigration policy was conducted, of course, in collaboration with Congress, it actually ended up creating a lot of deportations. 1.18 million immigrants were actually deported, and some people went as far as perhaps arguing that Obama was basically deporter in chief, which is not a label I'm using, but that's basically what is out here. So, in other words, even what you think is a friendly administration, if you do not get engaged and defend your interests, even with this incoming administration, don't be surprised if you end up actually being hurt. So the point is this: if you are not at the table, most likely you are on the menu. That is a lesson I'd like us to understand, regardless of who is in power now and who is going to be in power in days to come. If you are not at the table, you're on the menu.
Well, in as long as I'm not salad or coffee, I just want to be the one who is eating. I don't want to. I like this, and I think on the show not too long ago we had Nasib Sarafa from the ADC here in Minneapolis who was talking about the same. I think it's important for our immigrant community to take that very seriously. If you're not on the table, you're on the menu. What does that really mean? We need to dissect this in future conversations. And thank you, Kefa, for that take. So I know, Hulda, you've talked about this, but I wanted as a panel to focus on this subject really about the Kamala Harris and implications, particularly the immigrant community. I know a few years ago when Obama, I can't believe it's 12 years, Obama became president, I was so happy because I have a biracial son, and I was so happy to watch on TV, and I was telling him, hey, son, you're going to be, he's Luther, by the way, named Luther King, and I told him, hey, you're going to be another Obama. I'm also lucky I have daughters, and I'm so happy that my daughters now can look on the screen of the TVs and see Kamala Harris as a great source of inspiration. Not that she's the only one. Hulda, you're one of good example in our community who young girls, including your daughter, can look up to as an example. So what is your take relevant to a girl child? What is your take relative to that?
So again, I want to go back to, I love Professor Kefa's quote, if you're not on the table, you're on the menu. But going back to your point, we have to understand that Madam VP-elect Harris, her presence on the ticket, on this winning ticket, was not only a reflection of, how diverse and the demographic of the future of this country is, but also, it really, shines light on a president who was just ruthless on immigrants and repeatedly attacked women, and especially women of color. So for the country to stand up and say enough is enough, and elect Kamala Harris is a big sign that this country is changing. Yes, there's a huge population of the country that did vote for Donald Trump, but the other side of the coin is there's another side of the country that is not for the policies that he put in place for immigrants, for women of color, for LGBTQ community, for Muslims, and as a girl child who is an immigrant, I look at this and I remember just listening to her speech. There's a moment where she said that, while I might be, I think he goes, while I might be the first woman in office, I will not be the last, because every little girl watching her, watching tonight, will see that this is a country of possibility. That to me was the heart of her speech. She's not saying, hey, I'm the one. She's saying, hey, I am here to pave the path for the next generation of women, not only women of color, but all women who have been denied time and time again the opportunity. You know, all women in corporate America, I'm in corporate America, and I see day in and day out how my ideas as a Black woman, a woman of color, is taken by somebody else, and that person given credit. And I'm still sitting here wondering what just happened. You know, for women who have the ability and capability of taking a company or an organization, you know, to the next level, but are not given that opportunity to lead. So for me, you know, it's really personal. I keep on saying it's personal because I'm in it right now. You know, I was elected, the Mwanyagitinga community elected their very first woman to lead this organization, you know, and when I always say, when you empower and support women, you better watch them lead. And we are going to lead, and we'll continue to show that we are capable of leading. It's just a matter of creating that environment, providing that support to propel that growth child who's growing up thinking, what is possible in this country for me? So I sit here with a renewed hope for not only myself, but for our community, our immigrant community, and especially for women of color and the growth child who is growing up.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. We are so proud of you. Like I said, having the first female president is great, and I think there are big things ahead of you. You need to really open your mind. That's a good thing. You need to start thinking big. Probably we should be thinking of having you in the Senate not too long from now. That's subject for later. So, Honorable Ongeri, on the same note, let's talk in a language that is relatable to our immigrant population. That we came from a background where women, obviously, we understood to be stay home, have children, and take care of the family, which is okay. But we're really in a different social and cultural environment. And obviously, based on what Kamala Harris has done, we need to change to this environment. So talk to the girl child or mothers who are watching this. How should we navigate this foreign land in a way that we prepare young girls to be responsible members of our community, stable families, grow to be women who can be very proud in our sunset years?
I think that Kamala Harris's ascendancy into the vice presidency of this country is not just an affirmation of how far we have come. Remember, it's just about 100 years ago that women, all women, could not vote. Now, to have two Black women in the White House within a span of 10 years, remember, the girls can look up to Michelle Obama, who was the occupant of the White House not long ago, and now Kamala Harris is going there. I think that there is a testament to the changing demographics of this country. The country is getting younger. It's trending browner. And I would say to the young girl that you should be glad that you are not living in the 20s, because in the 20s, you would not have voted whether you're white, Black, or blue. So we have made tremendous progress that gives our girls hope that they can achieve things that previously were almost thought out of their reach. The other thing that I took, and I don't remember exactly why I saw this, but somebody did a graphic comparison of the countries that are led by women across the world in their management of COVID. Probably, perhaps, Dr. Edwin can help me. And it was striking. It was striking how the numbers turned out. And you know, numbers, Professor Tiso will tell you, numbers don't lie. So there is, I think, there is a realization across the world, not just in the US, that all things considered, everything compared, apples to apples, women seem to be not just good leaders. I think they might even be better leaders, as exemplified by that. But I also come at this issue as far as what it means for race relations in this country. You know, we've seen the movement post George Floyd, Lives Matter, and to have the next vice president of the United States possibly play a role in the healing of the country and saying, yes, Black lives matter, all lives matter, and I am here. And I may be a child of immigrants, but I also matter. And by the way, I am the Vice President of the United States. I think that says volumes to the world. And like one of the panelists said, it took a long time coming. Believe it or not, the U.S. has probably the last place in the world. I mean, Afghanistan, Pakistan have had, India have had women leaders. The UK, we've been looking pretty bad. I think this might be at least a redemption on the part of the country.
Ulda made a very striking point as she was talking about. She gave an example of what happens at work. She's the brand, and what she's really saying is that this is what happens to a lot of immigrant women at the workplace. They come up with ideas. By the way, not just women, including us, and I think even Professor Tiza will agree with you. Sometimes this happens to all of us. You have an idea, you bring up the idea, it's dismissed very quick, and then before you know, it goes around, and somebody else comes with the same idea, and your idea is adapted based on somebody's name. So, Dr. Bogongo, there's so many of our women, very brilliant women who are working very hard. What do you say to them? Kamala Harris, yes, has married. She's a woman of color in a blended family, has no children, but she's married to that level. What is the takeaway from this, particularly as relevant to our immigrant population?
Yeah, and I think we need to give Kamala Harris a lot more credit. She reminds us that in our society, a lot of Black men are in jail. And who has raised most African American families? It's the women. And she acknowledged the idea that they're too often overlooked. I'm quoting her, but so often prove that they're the backbone of our democracy. If you remember, Joe Biden was on the brink of losing this election until he hit North Carolina. Who showed up for him to propel him to a prohibitive February? So I think if you think about Kamala Harris and saying, maybe the first woman in office, and she's basically calling on the children of the country to think big, and I'll quote her again where she said, "Dream with ambition, lead with conviction, see yourself in ways that others might not see you." I think it's a testament of the life she has led, that yes, let your intellect, let your work do the talking. And so the message I think she's passing on is stay away from this stereotype that African American women, Black women are angry, they are nasty, and give them credit. Take this challenge to prove that yes, if you stick with your values and stick with your conviction, that you can contribute to the society and you can get credit for it. And not everybody sees you in the same light as otherwise would like to. Sort of other people will put you in a box. So my take here is that in sort of talking to our immigrant women is that you have a light to shine on the rest of us, the rest of the world, and this is one of those very, very motivating moments, if I may choose to use that word, and none better exemplified by the journey of Kamala Harris.
Good, thank you, Edwin. So let me bring you Kefa. Kefa, obviously, as a professor, I'm going to try to make the question as relevant as possible to your profession. I recall the last time you were on the show, you were talking about the role of women and mothers and the role of fathers. And I think one of the statements you quoted was close to something like, fathers do have something very powerful to their kids. But from an education standpoint, you and I know well that a huge percentage of graduates from colleges, I think 59% of graduate students in the US are women. 54%, according to the National Educational Statistics, 54% of that population, women really have PhD degrees, and that number is projected to continue growing. So what we're really seeing in our immigrant community is not surprising that most of our women are doing better socially and economically. And I think with Kamala Harris now, that still sends a sense of inspiration to our community. How should we navigate that? The fact that this inspires our women, they should grow. How should we inspire them so that they can go to the highest level, but at the same time, building a cohesive community?
Yeah, I think if I can start also by mentioning very briefly that the significance of Kamala Harris' rise to the vice presidency. I always remind people that luck is when opportunity meets preparation. She prepared herself. She's not a nobody that has just been raised to the position of being a vice president. She has prepared herself. So the number one lesson is prepare yourself. Opportunity will come knocking if you're prepared. And of course, what she also exemplifies is that women in many ways tend to think about others. We say in academia, when you educate a woman, you educate a family. When you educate a man, if you're not careful, you're educating an individual. And then sometimes you may not remember to bring in some of the other individuals. So there's that outlook about women that actually, in more ways than one, is perhaps what you were alluding to earlier in terms of why they end up sometimes being better leaders, is because they think of other people. And men, sometimes we might think of, us as individuals. And of course, I'm not saying that we are not good leaders for that role, but what I'm saying here is that there's a complementarity that we can work with. But at least if you're speaking to women in general, that is actually why they tend to be good leaders. Now, when you start seeing women ascending to these positions of power and also getting highly educated, part of what it's telling you is that when women are given an opportunity, they actually achieve. And some of what you are seeing is that women, remember, even in this country, did not necessarily have the best access to education for a long time. And when, of course, they were given the opportunity, they actually have taken up these opportunities with gusto. So particularly in the immigrant family, remember that women come here from societies where they don't always have the opportunities. And by the way, in fairness, so that we don't really end up putting men down too much, remember that some of what women do here, like let's say doing very well in the nursing arena, the same work they were doing in it was unpaid work. Their husbands could have been bankers, for example, and lawyers, and they were making big bucks. When they come into this country, then the unpaid work in Kenya becomes paid work in the United States, and a woman can actually get into nursing fields within weeks of getting here, while a husband who, for example, was a top-notch lawyer in Kenya or any other African country, or a banker, takes longer to actually be able to have the credentials to be able to work in this economy. So in fairness, let's have that thing in perspective. But having said that, then what we need is to find a way as families to work together. Whoever settles first in this country, let's work together and actually help the other person also to be able to have a foothold in this country. If we are talking of women's advancement, and I've seen a lot of debates, particularly in the African immigrant community, people complaining about how women are becoming educated and they're forgetting their husbands. If you talk about women's advancement, we should also be asking men to make sure you do not stagnate. If she takes one step, take two, if necessary. But we cannot just create this power separation whereby one goes so far ahead and leaves the other behind and expect that the family will survive. No, it won't. You need to be recalibrating the power all the time. Even in elections in America, the reason we cycle presidents from right to left is to actually to recalibrate. And so we need to do the same thing even within families. Let's not waste the time simply complaining about how women have gone ahead. Let's ask ourselves, is there a reason why we are not catching up as men? And then also come up with strategies of actually being able to catch up and be able to maintain that power parity. That is actually what it comes down to, is the power imbalance. If you do not balance the power, you're always going to be in trouble, regardless of how you look at it. So those are some of the key things I'll mention very quickly. But obviously, let's look at family resources as family resources. If it's the lady who managed to get her foothold first, then let's find a way of actually using those resources to bring up the husband. If it's the husband who got established first, then educate your wife, So we need to be able to have this complementariness in place. When you begin competing against each other rather than celebrating each other, you're going to be in trouble.
Thank you, Kefa. You make a very good point, and that leads me to bring you on, Madam President, to talk about the same. I know you've very eloquently talked about the role of women, and maybe in the next segment we're going to talk about more specifically about the boy child. I think that's important. Just like I said, I know I have my daughters. When my daughters are ready to get married, they need men to marry them, and so my hope is that somebody's preparing my future son-in-laws, just the same way as I'm preparing the son. So let's talk about community leadership. You know, that's what's happening. Holder, I know you've been on the show. I think this should be the third or no. You've been around here almost 7 times now. Let's talk about community leadership and and engagement. Knowing what we now know, why is it very important that we get involved in the political process, or at least in community leadership, just as Professor Tiso was talking moments ago?
Yes, so I think Dr. Bogongo and Professor Tiso put it very clearly. We cannot sit here and not participate and not sit at the table and start complaining about why things are not changing, why, our needs are being met, why the regulations and the laws that are being passed and the policies that are being passed do not accommodate our needs, right? So we have to definitely participate, like all of the panelists have said, in this process. I think the biggest hindrance for our community is the lack of knowledge, the lack of education about how things work. We're in a country where, if you learn how the process works and engage yourself, it produces fruits. That's the beauty of America. But if you don't know how the process works and you just go in and say, oh, I want this process to work for me, and not put in what the process is asking for you to put in, then, you will be very frustrated. So from a community perspective, from a Mwanyegetinge community perspective, my vision for this community is to really put a strategy in place that engages the community, that encourages the community to participate, that provides opportunities for members to think differently in terms of, all right, we've always done things this way, meaning we go to work, we maybe take a vacation to Kenya once in a while, and that's the same cycle. We have to start thinking about, I think Mr. Ongeri said that we have to start thinking about investing here. And what does that look like? Investment is in the forms of, for this particular topic, is in the form of investing our time, getting to know how the local government works. Yes, we can be excited about, the general elections and the big ticket presidential ticket, but really, who makes the difference and who makes policies that affect our community directly is local government. What I was shocked about this time around when I was voting is, Brooklyn Center, is that when I was going through the names of people who are candidates who are vying for positions, I was shocked at how many opportunities were there for our people to have their names there, to be a candidate. I was sitting here like, person even have anybody to challenge them, so that goes to show that, and I'm not taking away at the historic turnout of immigrant candidates that were in this race. I definitely have to give credit where it's due, but at the same time, this election cycle has really showed that we immigrants have a voice, and that if we apply ourselves, we can have that voice be heard and actually be a part of that process, be a part of that table that is making decisions. So for Mwanyegetinge, one of the things that I'm really wanting to push is this unity. We are all talking about unity. Yes, we want to thrive individually, but we can go a long way when we come together as a block, as a unit. And so one of the things that I'm really pushing is registration of new members. And when people call me or text me and ask me, well, tell me what Mwanyegetinge is offering, and to me, I sit back and I think, we are offering so much. It's more than this tangible things that you can get, right? Like, for example, I was talking to a gentleman earlier who had called me asking why he should register. And I told him, my brother, besides the resources that the leadership team of Mwanyegetinge is bringing into the community, the funding to put on programming that addresses the challenges that our community is facing, I think for me personally, the greatest thing that Mwanyegetinge can offer our members and our community is the opportunity and the environment to foster future leaders. What does that mean? If we have the numbers, we can go to the state, we can go to local government officials and say, hey, we are 10,000 strong. This is the issues that are affecting us, and so my leadership team can go into that office, can go into, the state and say, well, this is what's affecting us, without having data, without having the numbers. And so when I think about, the community and how we can actually make change that bring about what we want to see, it's about creating the environment and creating the opportunity for our members to participate in school board meetings, participate in what's going on with our local government decision-making process, know what's available, and for our community to really have that mind shift of because right now a lot of our people have one foot in Kenya and one foot here. And have that mind shift of let's invest here. I think one of the panelists said that the great-grandchildren are going to be here. And so let's start thinking about what does that future look like? And let's start investing in that way and go down that route.
Madam President, you make excellent points, and I understand the history obviously informs today and prepares us for tomorrow. When I think about especially the Kenyan community here in the Twin Cities, not even the Kenyan community, the immigrant community here, among the people that I think of who've been very instrumental in building our communities, luckily enough, is on the show, and that is Honorable Henry Ongeri. And I remember Ongeri for the last 20 plus years. I've been in committees with you, working on bringing so many people, whether it's Prime Minister Raila Odinga, whether it's Ruto, whether it's all those great leaders, whether it's you working with Peter Kennedy or the governors here, Mark Dayton and all those, that you've done excellent work for the community. Now, time has come, so we need to move forward. Based on your experience, why is it important that we work as a community, collectively, just the same way as Professor Otis is talking about, so that we are not on the menu, that we should be provided the menu?
That's thank you, Professor, for the kind words. Here's how I think about the issue. The choice is really very simple. I like the idea of being on the menu, because what that means is that somebody else is going to eat your lunch while you claim to be on the outside. Two things. We see a lot of people saying, you know what, that is Americans doing their elections, Americans doing that. The reality of the matter is, in some situations, what happens through policy and implementation of policy affects us sometimes in greater numbers than it does the American population, the indigenous population. Here's what I mean. If you think about how many Africans or how many Kenyans or how many foreigners were affected by the so-called Muslim ban, those are families, those are people who can't travel into the United States because of that ban. So you cannot tell somebody in a Muslim family that the politics of America do not affect them when their father or their uncle is locked outside of the country and they can't visit them. So you don't have a choice but to get in, and I like what Dr. Tisa said, get in strategically, think about our interest, not get carried away by the labels of this, that, liberal, conservative, but focus like a laser on what really benefits us. How does our participation bring those things that then make our community stronger and protect us from dangerous leaders who may end up causing harm to our own homes and our own families? So think of what is happening now in the past few years when we've had legal immigration. These are people, by the way, these are not people who shouldn't be in the country. These are legal immigration situations where we've had that go down by 49+%. What that actually means is people who should be together not staying together. So it is not a question of whether we want to participate. The question is, how do we participate and smartly so that these things that are happening, that appear to be happening far away in Washington, do not harm us? The other thing I wanted to mention is the myth. There's a myth, and as a lawyer, I can dispel that myth right here, that you have to be a citizen of the United States to be involved in the process. That is not the case. The law is you can only vote if you are a citizen, but nothing tells you you cannot participate in a campaign, that you cannot drop literature, that you cannot support a candidate that embodies your values, that you cannot door knock for them, that you cannot even help fundraise for them. You can be a very significant player without casting the ballot on November 3rd. So what I tell people is find your level of comfort and participate you must, because if you don't, then those policies that come harming you, I think it's Madam President who said, then don't complain when those policies start harming you because you had a chance to shape them and you decided to sit out. If you decide to sit out, then I think it's only fair that the consequences visit you, and that when you cry, we can ignore the cry. We don't want to ignore the cry. We're encouraging our fellow immigrants to find a place at that table so that they are not on the menu, as was aptly said.
Well, and as long as they provide me the menu, I have no problem. Let me bring in Edwin here. Edwin, so let's talk about this. I know you're one of those ones who have done incredible work in the community, and I want to thank you on here for the great work you're doing with Diaspora. I think that you may not know this, but I know a lot of people who watch this, including myself, appreciate the incredible work you're doing, and you've been part of our sponsors here at KDRTV. So thank you for doing that. So let's talk about community participation, not just in the political process. There are many ways in which we can participate to build a strong social, economic, and political base for us to make a case, whether it's at state level or at national level, and by extension, offer something to our home countries. What's your take on the same?
Yeah, so I think one has to assume at least that in order for us to even get to a point where we can prioritize how we move forward, how we come together, that we need to address some of our systemic failures in being united as an immigrant community, and develop a sense that we are better together. So that work needs to be done. There is no shortcut. The other piece is that all politics is local. So if you don't participate in, for example, your local school board and figure out how they assign resources for your kids, your local city council, how do they decide a road is going to pass somewhere? How do they decide they're going to fund a certain development project? It takes participation. I do not think that we are going to make an impact if we participate in a vacuum. So I feel that there has to be a very strong foundation laid when we look at each other as immigrants. And if I look at Kenyans, for example, and say that we are better off together as a strong community, regardless of which part of the country we're in, because there we can do an inventory of how many talents we have. We have a lot of planners, we have engineers, we have doctors, we have lawyers, we have all sorts of people that we can rely on to develop a very clear, concise agenda that we can say, in order for us to be involved in this participatory politics, we have a strategy that we can execute, and we have the necessary resources to do it in terms of human resource. So having said that, again, if we look at other communities that are showing some elements of success, and I look at our brothers from Somalia, for example, they have figured out that participation is how you get your interests taken care of. They've put a woman in Congress. They have several House representatives and senators here in the state of Minnesota and elsewhere. So there is a blueprint of how this gets done. Now, a strong community is not just a collection of individuals. It's a looking inwards to see how we're supporting our families, immigrants are working really hard, and Madam President said, look, some people have a foot on the continent and some have a foot here. You're working overtime to educate your brothers and sisters, do your whatever projects you're doing. And there's a sense that there is a lot of stress in the community. I think participating in this process gives all of us a chance to pause and say, hey, we can build a strong community here. We can prosper here. We can get our kids to prosper, go to school and develop careers and that sort of thing. We can't do that in a vacuum. So my take is, this is a wake-up call for us that in order for us to get really, really impactful, the unity has to start at home. We need to look at our organizations within our community, come together and say, let's cooperate, let us promote unity, let us create structure, and let us be purposeful. And as Madam President has said, her organization is really coming up with a strategy to really engage people. I think it's a right way to go. Without that foundation, I think we're going to go through another cycle and find that we're still on the menu.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. So thank you. And again, I want to thank those of us who are watching. By the way, I see so many questions coming on my phone. If you don't mind, please go to our Facebook page and post the questions and comments. If the panelists have a few minutes, we'll have them answer the questions. But please do so, because I'm receiving so many questions. So Kef, I want to bring you on, and I know you've talked about this many times. I hope you don't get tired answering the same question, the question about community involvement, and especially us not being on the menu, but us being provided with the menu. So you want to respond on the same, and I want to pose this question to you that I just received here. Do you believe that Biden and Harris have the guts to drive the immigration policies that Democrats have always yearned for as relative to our immigrant population? So your take.
To respond to the last one first, what this new administration will do will actually be moderated by Congress. Immigration law is made by Congress. The president can propose it, but it will have to be passed through Congress. As many of you know, the Senate is probably, as of now, is a Republican, depending on what happens in Georgia. So you have to understand that whatever the president can do will be negotiated in Congress. So which means that they can propose things, and whatever they are able to propose is basically what we kind of encourage them to. So let's not say whether they have the guts. I think I'll turn the question on its side and ask, do we have the guts to be able to actually outline our priorities and work for them to be achieved? Politicians are our employees. They can do what we tell them to do. The question is whether we're going to actually play the role we need to be able to get them to do what they need, because they need our support. Let me go back to community involvement. I'll never get tired of community involvement. I've been involved in the community for a while. I've, by the grace of God, managed to accomplish a few things. That is actually how I've learned how important it is to be involved in these things. I'm involved in state government in some reasonable capacity. And everything I keep telling you of why we need to be at the table comes from that experience. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a position and I see decisions being made that actually will affect us negatively. And I can assure you that if I wasn't there to speak up for us, because remember, it's not the responsibility of other people to know our needs and to speak as for us. That is our responsibility. You cannot give up that power and then start complaining about how somebody else is not cognizant of your needs. It's your job, it's your responsibility to be able to do that. So this is why I keep coming back to this issue here. What I mean by being on the menu is when the resources are being divided, let's say there is $1 and there are 4 people at the table that are deciding on how that $1 is going to be used. It's going to be, the 4 people will decide on how to use the dollar in a manner that benefits them. If you are not there, out of sight, out of mind. So this is why we need to be there. Immigrants sometimes tell me, oh, I'm too busy to be involved in the community because I'm working. All I can tell you is that you being busy and not being at the table simply makes it easier for you to be chopped up. On the table, because whether you like it or not, your dollars, which you're working hard for and you're paying taxes for, are on the table. And by symbolically, therefore, you are the one on the table. So if you don't show up, you simply make it easier for other people to eat your lunch. Please take that to the bank. And I mean it at the local level, at the city level, at the state level. So let me give you another number here very quickly for some of you that may not know. In many cases, actually, the local, state, and local government system is actually bigger in terms of expenditure than the federal government. So remember, the whole point of the federal government is to do three things: to conduct foreign policy, which includes immigration, to manage trade, foreign trade, and obviously to regulate domestic trade, also interstate commerce to a large extent, and also to do foreign, to basically defend us against foreign enemies. Those are the three things. Outside of those, everything else is done at the local level, at the state level, and at the city level. Therefore, notice that much of your tax dollars actually go to these two units of government, which some of us think are too small to be involved. Let me also say something about local involvement. Sometimes immigrants do not get involved because they say, if I'm in Minnesota, which is mostly a democratic state, and I like the politics of the state, then I get involved. If I happen to be in a state that is not democratic, maybe Republican, then, oh, I don't like Republicans, so I'm not going to be involved. That's a foolish way of looking at things. You have to learn to play the hand that you've been dealt. Actually, in some of my state responsibilities, there's nothing I can do if I do not, as a matter of policy, make sure that I'm basically working, they say, with passing the same initiative. Quite frankly, it will not become law unless you have a Republican sponsor and a Democratic sponsor. So you cannot go there bringing your political prejudices to the table and think that actually you can get anything done. You have to be able to speak to both sides of the house, regardless of your own individual political leanings. That is basically what it is. So the reason I bring this up is that in Minnesota, many of you are working in an environment that is largely democratic. And by the way, we shouldn't even assume that everybody in Minnesota is a Democrat, either, even in the immigrant community. That's a foolish way of looking at things. There are many of us that are working in states that are actually more on the right. You cannot lose your responsibility to defend yourself just because you're using the excuse that you are not in a democratic leaning state. And by the way, sometimes you find the governor is a Democrat, your local city council is largely Republican, your sheriff may not even be Democrat either, he may very well be an independent. The point is this: identify your priorities and work hard to achieve them regardless of who is in power. That is your job. It is not anybody's job.
Great work you're doing at the state of Ohio. I think you're carrying the immigrant flag very high. We're so proud of you. That I know the panelists and many people watching will appreciate this. So again, there are so many questions coming here. So let me pose some of these questions very quickly. And for our viewers, one thing I want to agree with you, Kefa, is that I think we need to go beyond this idea of aligning ourselves with particular political parties without even understanding what policies they stand for. I think we need to get deep into what they stand for, and then based on that, we align ourselves to people who can help us. I think that is essential. Dr. Bugongo, I want to get to you here. Is a question from somebody viewing this show, and here's a question. We have a senior medical professional in the panel. Do you believe that Biden will drive COVID-19 out of our country? And I know I think the essence of that question is that those ones are talking about it's politics. You're just talking politics. But once you get to the office, this might be not necessarily the case. Do you really believe he can drive COVID-19 out of the country?
So if you look at the example of New Zealand, it matters how the leader of a country responds to a pandemic. The tone of the president and directing resources to ensure there is a cohesive policy. I think that's extremely important. I'm very positive that the medical community will support a policy that looks at how we test, how we contact trace, and how we ensure that pockets of COVID-19 outbreaks are contained. It's not that hard when you look at it from a public health standpoint. The idea that we can have a very sort of do it the way you can policy and have the president disagreeing with the medical experts. I think what you're going to see from Joe Biden is a much more desire to sort of bring people together from the medical profession, from public health, from our National Institutes of Health, people like Dr. Fauci. I hope he stays on, and have a more cohesive policy guided by the CDC from Atlanta. So yes, I am confident that if the president sets a tone that we have enough information, we have the science, we have the human resource, that we can craft a very cohesive policy to better manage COVID-19.
Respond. Thank you, Dr. Bogongo. Would I have a very big question for you here, but I'm going to hold you for a moment because this, I think, should be a good way to end the show. So don't mind, please. I'm not ignoring you. You're the only lady on the show. I need to make sure that I respect that fact as well. But I have a question for you, Henry. People are asking here, a quick question from the audience. They're saying, thank you so much for talking about the American politics. That those of us who are here who are not necessarily interested in staying here long term, we want to go back to Africa, whether it's in Nigeria, whether it's in Kenya, whatever country they're coming from. And the question is there anything he or she, or from the panelists, that you learned from these elections that can be applied to our home country's politics, especially diaspora contestants? Essentially, there are those ones who want to go back to Africa to run for political offices. Are there lessons learned from here that they can take back home? In part, because some of the people actually who have been here and who have gone back to Africa and run for political office successfully, some have been very successful, and quite frankly, some have been a major disappointment.
So, Dr. Okari, was that question directed to me or Henry? Yes. Go ahead.
That's for Henry. Ben, that's Henry.
Thank you. A very good question for me, and I'm sure for people. You know, all of you, I think, probably with the exception of Madam President, are old enough to know a time when people from across Africa traveled outside of the continent for the purpose of education and then going back. You remember the Mboya airlifts back in the 60s. So we had that dynamic where the brightest people from the continent will travel to the US, to the UK, get educated and go back and participate in governance of public service. I think that there are valuable lessons from the United States, and not just from this election alone. And I've been fortunate enough to participate in more than one election cycle here in the US. And I will tell you one thing, the politics, regardless of where you go, and that is called organize. You cannot acquire political power without organizing. Organizing means gathering people and gathering resources. And so if I take you back to 2008, one of the reasons President Obama was able to change the landscape was just simply organizing and understanding where people are and touching them on the needs that they had. So if we learn nothing else from the American political system, we should learn that organizing is key. We should also learn that you can practice politics of disagreement without being disagreeable. And for those of us who are from African countries, we know the sad stories in Africa that starting from Kenya, where we've had political violence, you go to Rwanda, where we had genocide that was partly political as well, story of Nigeria. So this is continent-wide. I think that one lesson we should learn, I mean, the president here is unhappy, but we haven't seen people get on the street and get others killed because of politics. So I think that one of the lessons that I have learned personally is to be able to articulate your issues without demonizing the other side. For example, if I plan to take up a role in one of the counties in Kenya, or even at the national level, I would like my politics to be different from what goes on a daily basis. I would like to be able to advance an agenda that is full of ideas, that's full of hope, that really shows people that 2 decades that I spent in the United States were to make me a better leader. And just very quickly, I'd like to talk about my colleagues who have traveled home and have attempted to engage in public service. And you said it correctly, Dr. Kari, that our success rate is not high. Part of the problem, I think, is that we do not want to engage in the heavy lifting that it takes to move a community together with us as leaders. We often show up with a whole list of things that we think are good for the community and try to implement that, when the opposite should be the case, that we should show up with big ears and huge parts so that we can take note of what the community needs of us. Our education and our experience should only be relevant to the extent that we listen to the people and get their agenda moving forward, as opposed to our agenda that we conceived in the halls of Minneapolis or Beijing and delivered it to our people at home. So I feel that we've learned valuable lessons, and these are lessons that we would be applying whether we are there on the ground or we are doing that remotely. But I think that really the United States is a great crucible for leadership if you pay attention.
I hope we can have you back on the show sooner than later to talk about, especially what you talked moments ago about matters of law, which are really affecting our people. So before we finish up here, I know Professor Tisa has to sleep, is on the eastern side. Kefa, there's a quick question here from, I think, an educator who is asking a very relevant question, I think, and I recall, and I want to salute Dr. Cherono, Professor Ndianguhi, Mushahi, and Baha, who were here on the show 2 weeks ago talking about international students. And the question here, I think, is direct to you. How are international students going to gain from this Joe Biden government?
I think there are 2 ways to gain. One is obviously that the administration is more likely to relax requirements for international students. I've already seen some indication that the new administration plans to reverse a lot of Trump's policies, even on the first day in office. But I have to temper that with the understanding that it depends actually to a large extent also on what is happening in terms of controlling the virus. Because there are some things that can be done executively, but there are other enduring challenges that have been brought about by the virus itself. So yes, in terms of policy, they are more likely to make it easy on international students, subject to some of the limitations that may be put on them by the virus itself. And also, let me go back and say something about the returnees real quickly. Just pose a question. I'm not going to answer the question, which is this. Sometimes it's very easy to think that after I've been in the US for 5 years, I can go back to any African country and make a big impact overnight. What I always advise people, and I've advised myself over many years, is to make sure that I succeed in the US first, and then to take those successes from the US and implement them in Kenya. So there are many cases where, unfortunately, people don't necessarily make it here, and then they think that somehow I'll show up in Kenya and all of a sudden be able to succeed. So in other words, I always remind myself that, remember, you always take yourself with you. So don't go there because you have not succeeded here. Go there because you have succeeded here and you actually have something to offer. It shouldn't be a place you go to as a last resort. It is a place that you go to because you actually have something to offer. Otherwise, you'll go there and be frustrated. And we have a lot of people that actually have gone without due diligence and have ended up not making much difference. The other thing is, when you go back, ask yourself, what is your entry point? And how do you know that actually that entry point is going to work? So are you just another politician, for example? Are you just another administrator in the government? Or there is actually something unique that you're actually providing? Because when we don't do a good survey examination, we end up thinking that we'll show up there and things will be easy. And then when we go there and we get beaten thoroughly, we become disappointed. Sometimes we come back complaining how people don't know what is good for them. But yes, that may very well be the case, that maybe they don't know what we have to offer. But for me, if you do a good self-examination first before you go, even if you go and you don't succeed, at least you can come back with your head high, or you can stay there with your head held high. What I'm trying to caution us against is the idea of thinking that you can simply leave the US and go there and make a difference. By the way, you might end up repeating the same lessons of history, whereby solutions that are created in the United States for problems in Africa end up failing miserably because actually they are not grounded. So if there's one word I can use before you return, make sure you're grounded.
Okay. Oh, thank you. And especially in the age of technology and social media, I think it's safe to say that the African continent and everywhere around the world, people are very interconnected. People are aware of what's happening. And I think as we talk about community leadership and partnerships, that's when it becomes essential that going forward, one of the lessons, at least in my suggestion, is we need to get to a situation where if we strongly believe there's somebody among us that's who we think can go back and make meaningful contribution, then we can rally behind that individual. But the fact that somebody just wakes up one morning and all of a sudden is running for political office is quite frankly is a very bad representation of who we are here in the diaspora. And so that brings another question to you, Ulda, now. Somebody's asking, as a community leader, what are you doing, or what's in the works from behind the scenes to make sure that the Kenyan community in the US is united so that we're not divided based on different tribes?
Yeah, that is a very good question. Let me just, I feel like, everybody had an opportunity to touch on, except for Dr. Vogonko, this whole aspect of diaspora candidates running in Kenya. I'll just say my quick comment on that. I was on a show, I think yesterday, the day before yesterday, and they asked me, so how do you see, can you bring those ideas from America to here? How do you compare? And my thought, and I literally just say this, you can't take American ideals like Professor Otiso said and implement them in Kenya. You're looking at deep-rooted traditional cultural traits, cultures, traditions that have been there for years. And then you look at the democracy of the US, which is 244 years, I believe, to our 60s. 7 years of democracy. So what I basically said, when we have candidates who are willing and able and want to serve our people in Kenya, they have seen the good that America has provided for them and they want to translate that to Kenya. What I always advise is that, yes, take those good ideas, go there on the ground, see what's there, listen to the people, hear what they have to say, see how those ideas implement and allow them to give you that advice of, hey, that idea is good, but if you twist it this way, it can work. So I'm excited to hear that our people want to go back and bring the knowledge that they have gained back to Kenya. But we also have to factor in what is on the ground in Kenya, like Professor Otiso said, before we go there and get disappointed. All right, so to your question, how do we unite the whole entire Kenyan community here in the U.S. for common good? So Mwanyagitinge is our constitution basically, states that Kenyans in Minnesota. It doesn't say a specific tribe. It doesn't say a specific group of people. It just says Kenyans in Minnesota. But it also opens that door for people who have bought into the vision of Mwanyagitinge to also take part. So in a perfect world, in my mind, I could see Mwanyagitinge having chapters in New Jersey, in Texas. I know there's Mwanyagitinge organizations out there, but ours is the most vibrant one. So my goal and my hope is that within this short amount of time that I have is to create a platform where all of these leaders are coming together and are saying, I think one of the panelists said that when we come together and talk about what big ideas can move us forward and what actions can we take to move us forward. Our community, we love to talk. We love to talk about big ideas. But then when it comes down to actually putting the action into those ideas, that's a whole different story. So I'm hoping that my leadership team will set this example. And I know that I will not accomplish 100% of the things that I want to do, but I hope that if I can create an environment where it fosters that spirit of collaboration, because at the end of the day, the Kenyans in New Jersey, the Kenyans are in Texas, the Kenyans are in the West Coast, have different agendas and have different things that are driving them. If we can come under one table and say, hey, for example, we want to vote as diasporans, as Kenyan in diaspora. We want to champion that and pick up one or two big main agendas and put action points towards accomplishing that. I think that would be a good start to potentially having this huge group of people who are called Kenyans, who can say with one word, hey, we want to accomplish this thing here in the US, and we do it. We want to accomplish something in Kenya, depend on what part of Kenya, and we actually do it. But it starts by coming together, sitting down and agreeing, and then putting action points, and then acting on those action points and making it possible.
Well said, Madam President. The good news is that we have a platform. KDRTV is here for you as a community leader and all community leaders to come here so that we can exchange ideas. And hopefully sooner than later, we can have a common. We don't have to look for CNN or WCO, CCO or Fox News. We have KDRTV, and we should be safe with that. So I'm sorry, guys. There's a question from a viewer. We need to finish. Kefa needs to go to sleep. He has to work tomorrow. But I just want to respect the viewer who has just texted the question here. Here is the question. I might want to reframe the question for the viewer, please. The question is, Dr. Bogongo, you want to respond to this one. Is America's foreign policy going to improve? How do you believe that Russia, China will relate to the Biden government? But I think that question, as you respond to the same, to respect to the viewer, I think it's the time we start talking about how American foreign policy affects the sub-Saharan African region as well. Your response?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. Let me also at least chime in on these diaspora candidates before I articulate my thoughts about China and Russia. I agree with Professor Otiso. Sometimes we think that Kenyans are not progressive. I can assure you that we have some of the most interesting innovations, interesting entrepreneurs, very successful enterprises coming out of Kenya, to the extent that people from Europe are going to learn from Kenyans. So it is true that if you want to make a difference in Kenya and you want to run for office, go and try and do something with your local community before you run for office and get to learn the lay of the land and get some grassroots recognition and so on. If you just go just because you have a label, I'm from the United States, I can assure you that's a recipe for disaster. But let's talk about China and Russia. So we know very well that the Russians and the Chinese are not, I would not call them the defenders of democracy and good governance and anti-corruption. But they are very, very interested and investing in the geopolitical dominance and cutting away the idea that America is sort of a global policeman. So when you look at the current state with Donald Trump and his idea that the best thing is to sort of get this trade war with China and to also sort of put the brakes on a lot of years of American foreign policy that involves assistance to many countries to sort of promote good governance and democratization and so on and so forth. I think over the last 4 years, you have seen a very emboldened Russia. You've seen a very aggressive China. Look at what they've done on the continent. I know it started before Donald Trump, but they have accelerated the idea that if you go to the Americans for any help, they will say, wait a minute, if you come to us, we'll give you whatever you want. Let us build you roads. And by the way, on your way out, carry a suitcase of money for your own good. And so we've had this sort of entrenched corruption on the African continent that is driven by the idea that the Chinese know that African leaders will be happy not to be held accountable. So yes, I think that there's going to be a pause in the idea that how do you stop this sort of Russian and Chinese sort of expansion, especially on the African continent and a little bit in South America. Now, it's very, I think people don't pay attention to this, but look at what's happening in the Middle East and the idea that China and Russia are starting to play a much bigger role. And you think about now the United States is selling missiles and this sophisticated military equipment to some of the countries in the Middle East. And then there's competition between, Turkey is trying to test missile systems from Russia. And there's a chance that this last 4 years and this foreign policy is going to create an environment, maybe an arms race in the Middle East. But I want to say this. We have to pay attention as we live in this country that over the rest of the world, there's always been a historical investment by the US government through the State Department in helping countries move towards a more inclusive society, promote governance, promote democracy. I feel that has been eroded the last 4 years. It's basically, I know it's America first, and it's the idea that why don't we let people sort their things out? But when you're the most powerful, most resourced country in the world, I think there's a certain sense of responsibility that successive American presidents have taken very seriously. And I feel that's been lost in the last 4 years.
Sorry, I know when I finish, Kef, I'm going to bring you in and quickly, Henry, for a moment. Honestly, I'm biased. I get tired with this conversation around a tilt towards Southeast Asia or West Europe. And I think it's high time that we talk about also what America means to the African continent. And if we're talking about developing the next generation, the likes of Hulda, we must now start talking about if we, the older generation, are passing on, and then our children should really be the ambassadors who are going to, go back to Africa, or at least be the best ambassadors for the US to the African continent and help grow the African continent, so that we don't become a continent where all we need to do is to receive cookies. In fact, if you look at what's happening in Africa, you see in Kenya, it's boiling right now. If you go to Ethiopia, it's not good there. If you go to Nigeria, Nigeria is in crisis. And my beloved country, Ivory Coast, is in turmoil. So going forward, what do you suggest, really? Or what do you say that should be the best foreign policy for the U.S. towards Africa?
I think if I go first, it looks like I'm unfrozen, or you can still hear me.
I can hear, yes.
Okay, yeah. So there's something we need to understand. American foreign interests don't really change that much. Promotion of democracy, capitalism, and those types of things. But within those broad, enduring, foreign policy priorities, there's room for maneuver. Let's say for the sitting president of the U.S. at any one given time. In some ways, you don't need to worry that our kids will actually play the role you outlined. That is actually the whole point of the 1965 immigration law. The reason it was created was to diversify American American markets. And the easiest way to do that is to bring people from all over the globe, and then they become your ambassadors. So that is already happening. The Kenyan diaspora is already playing a very big role. All of these African countries that have a substantial diaspora in the US, the diaspora is already playing a big role in actually helping them to remain afloat. You can be sure that the Kenyan economy will not be functioning right now were it not for remittances. We have actually held the shilling, the exchange rate steady for a very long time, almost like a decade and beyond. So in a way, that is already happening. So what I'd like to kind of contribute is to change the question slightly. What kind of contribution are we making? The contribution is inevitable, but what kind of contribution are we making? So US foreign policy is very well defined. Democracy, human rights, and the like. So as we speak about US foreign policy in Africa, perhaps the question I also need to ask is the same question I was asking African immigrants in this country. So what is Africa's, enduring interests? When are they going to be defined? Because American foreign policy can respond to things that are clearly defined. We shouldn't just be sitting there and saying, America this, America that. The question becomes, what are Africa's own interests? What are the interests of the African Union? What are the interests of Kenya? And how does it plan to engage with the foreign policy of the United States, which, by the way, is actually fairly well defined. The Chinese are pursuing their interests in Africa. The Russians are pursuing their interests in Africa. The US is pursuing its interests in Africa. Once again, it's the responsibility of Africans to define what their own interests are, and then to think through how they engage with the US in that regard. Otherwise, we will not be happy with some of the things that actually happen. Those of you that are a little bit older here, we have gone, let's say, through in the 1990s, the structural adjustment programs of the World Bank, IMF, that basically came from Washington, and we were told what to do in terms of economic management. and we can complain all we want, but at the end of the day, even in the question of foreign policy, America's foreign policy is very clearly defined. What is ours? What are our priorities, among other things? So those are the things that we need to answer. But I'm also going to conclude by saying very quickly that our kids are going to play a role anyway. Remember, we have and unless I'm wrong, I'm told that there is a Kenyan immigrant that has been playing a very critical role in the Biden-Harris campaign already. So those things are happening whether we like it or not. So the issue is, how do we make sure that it's a positive contribution, as it were? So once again, set aside the emotionalism, define what our interests are, let's come up with means and ways of achieving them, and we'll be fine. Rather than we sit back, we let somebody else act, and then we react. And then we complain how we don't like how they acted. How about we act first?
Sounds good. I know it's time to run. Ongeri, I know you want to finish, and then I'm going to let Madam President finish for us. I know Professor Tizo is talking about the Washington consensus. I think the economists in Washington who sit down and think for the world, and therefore define what kind of socio-economic policies that should be adopted by the world over. And if we in Africa don't respond or don't have somebody on the table in Washington to be part of the economic policy making decision, obviously it will become a problem, and especially those ones who have the aspirations of going back to Africa. And then we pretty much go back home with no ideas, and I think there's still hope. So last comment on the same Ongeri, and then I will have Madam Hulda make a final statement.
Very quickly, obviously, the conduct of foreign policy and, anytime you say foreign policy of the United States towards Africa, that in itself is a problematic statement, because that presumes that Africa, which is a continent, a collection of 53 countries, necessarily have a similar interest. You may find that the United States relates to South Africa in a very much different way than it relates to, say, Zimbabwe. So I think it's also good for us to know that the United States relates to each country individually based on interest. Really, it's for those who think that the United States sends people to Africa to kind of help the Africans, they are wrong. The United States only worries about the United States' interest, and probably these are the business of helping us come up is gravy on their program. It's not what they are there for. What that means, though, is that the Africans themselves have to take up the responsibility themselves, because to the extent that we walk around the world, whether it's in Beijing or Washington or London, with begging baskets, we cannot turn around to respect, to place a military base in Mombasa. So I think my challenge, my fellow African leaders, is the way to strengthen our hand at the negotiations with the United States, with China, Russia, the UK, or anybody, is standing our strong institutions. And how do you do that? If for every project that's funded by a foreign government, 10% goes into the pockets of bureaucrats, our own leaders, then how do we turn around and say we are going to be independent of you soon? We are not going to do that. So to me, the first question should come to us. How are we prepared to face these huge international companies and countries by showing them that, you know what, we can stand on our own, to the extent that we still come begging. I mean, the other day, our president was in France trying to sign up, I don't know how many billions of shillings of loans. So I think we have to really look at our own resources and negotiate in a smart way that forces, think about it, this is very quickly. I do not think that there is a single tea branch or tree growing in either the US or the UK. We produce the tea that they drink, and yet we allow the multinationals to determine what our farmers who produce the tea get. That kind of dynamic only makes us weaker in the negotiations because we are not taking care of our stuff. So my appeal to the African leaders is stop this dependency syndrome. Then America and Russia and China will negotiate with you. Otherwise, we are in this for a long, long time.
And I think with that, I'm going to have, I think the best way to say as well, as I think as Edwin was talking about, Kev, and yourself, is that in addition to the money we send to Africa, I think it's important for us as immigrants to learn really what's happening here in the US so that, yes, we send money, but at the same time, improve our conversations with the people we interact with back home. And that way we can help at least our home country grow. I think that's important rather than talking about some things that are very trivial. I think we need to focus more on substance than that. So, Madam President, I think it's been a long time on the show. I think it would be safe to say to you what the elections are gone. We have a vice president, but now we do have a Madam President. How do we move from here? Closing statement on our behalf.
Thank you once again, Dr. Okare, and your wonderful co-partner there, Mr. Kibwato, for a job well done, and for just putting KDRTV on the map, because this really allows us to communicate and to educate our community on matters that on things that matter to us. And so I really want to applaud you guys for a job well done. So my closing statement is very simple. And I want to start with what the rest of the panelists completed with. The African continent, again, as Dr. Lawyer Ongeri, Attorney Ongeri has stated clearly, we need to take responsibility for our own actions. We need to take responsibility for our own development and our growth. We need to revisit our checklist. What does that look like? What do we want? And then rework that. And then also, as the Diasporans, we need to also recognize the power that we have as diaspora immigrants and the power we have in terms of economic development, economic power. For Kenya, I think we send over 200+ billion shillings, a year. If we say, let's just stop and not send money, for a week, those leaders are going to sit back and listen to what we have to say, but it's a matter of how do we come together and unite and then make our voices heard. And then when it comes to our community, it's time to participate. We can no longer sit here and make excuse after another excuse, as in, as to the reason why we can't participate in our own growth and development in our country. And I'm not gonna, go back and relate what the panelists said in terms of the different opportunities that are out there. And my second point is that let's have the guts and the will, to bring about the change that we want. We all said we can't sit here, and complain when decisions are being made if we're not sitting at that table, so that comes down to us being participating. And then lastly, as a woman and as a leader in our community, although this election has been a historical election for women, not only here in the US, but all over the globe, it's not a free ticket. And what I mean by that, Kamala Harris didn't just become, or have the highest ranked woman, role in the history of the American government just out of the blue. Like Professor Otiso said, if you look at her history, she worked to this point. She put in the work. So any young people who are out there listening to this right now, I want to encourage you, the decisions that you're making right now will affect your future endeavors, will affect what you want to do in the future. Think about what you want to do and think about what steps can you take right now to propel you towards that. And for parents out there, let's support our kids. Let's support their talents. Let's support their ideas and their vision, because, you can't just wake up and decide, oh, today I'm going to be this. You have to have a track record to show that you're capable of that position and that opportunity when it presents itself. When I ran for Mwanyegetinge president, I came out with my resume, and thankfully the community was like, she's capable. And they honored me in selecting me because I have a resume. And so what I'm trying to say is that our community is capable of bringing the change that they want to see happen. It's a matter of us deciding together that this is what needs to happen. Let's get it done. Let's unite, because when we come together and unite as one voice, things move. We've seen it with the Somali community. We are seeing it slowly with the Liberian community, who are now creating that change. They have had very successful candidates in these past elections. Why can't we as the Kenyan community here in Minnesota and across America do the same thing? So with that said, once again, it was such a pleasure to be a part of this panelist. And it's an honor for me to be amongst leaders within our community, people who respect the fact that I'm a woman and the fact that I have a voice and the fact that I can actually contribute. And for that, I want to honor each one of you and let you know that as a woman and as a leader, thank you for honoring me and respecting me to be in this position and supporting me.
Okay. Well said, Madam President. I think it would be safe to say with that, I think it's good to end the show here. We don't want to make anything bad, but I also encourage you to do what you're doing and aim high. I think we are lucky at KDRTV. Pretty much most of the people who came on the show as political candidates in almost all positions won their elected position. So that's good for us that we now have people who have gone through the show and now are in the state Senate, which is really very good for us. So again, I want to thank you all. I want to thank you, Henry Ongeri. Thank you for the good work you've done for the community over the last 2 decades. And I hope you come back soon to talk about immigration and many matters that affect the community. So thank you for spending time this night. Also, Professor Tiso, thank you. I don't know how much to thank you, but I think you know very well that, especially here in Minneapolis, you are the most beloved son. So anytime you're here, be sure you have a lot of nyamachoma, mbuzi, and everything. So thank you for staying up late for us. And my dear friend, Dr. Edwin Bogongo, thank you. You are one of the founders of KDRTV, and you've been a great sponsor of us. Thank you for the incredible work you're doing. And obviously, we have many arrangements that we'll be talking so that we educate our community, at least inform the community on what's going on. So again, and Madam President, again, many thanks to you and your families for letting you be on the show tonight. I also can't forget to thank Ben Kebuato. I think this is a person, the unsung hero of all this. The man works very hard, is behind the computers, and Collins, his son, making sure that the production is coming live, and many people now across the country and all around the world are watching. So Ben and son, just know that we thank you, and personally, I'm so proud to work with you guys. You're absolutely incredible. And for those ones watching, thank you for allowing us come on to your smartphones and on your TV station, your laptops, whatever that is. But do us one favor, please go to Facebook page and like us. I think that's important. And if you have any comments, please comment, and especially give us feedback so that we can improve. Also on YouTube, go on there and subscribe. It doesn't really, you don't have to pay anything. Just click subscribe, and that's good for us. And also we are on Twitter. Follow us if you don't mind. So we have a lot of programs signed up for the next few weeks. We'll have those on our website and we'll communicate to you. But for now, thank you so much for being on, and have a good night and a great week ahead.